Clarence Thompson, a 70-year-old black man, stood in the public parking lot near the Hawthorne County Courthouse, sweat beading on his forehead. The black SUV in front of him had its driver's side door wide open, and he leaned over the front seat, hands rummaging through scattered papers and receipts. Come on, he muttered, his voice low and hoarse, impatient. He was searching for a crucial file for a hearing, but everything in his grandson Malik's car was a mess. Clarence, a veteran state lawyer, wasn't used to things being out of his control, but today, he was running late. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the latest stories. The old fountain pen, a keepsake from his father, rested in his suit jacket pocket, brushing lightly against his chest with every move. His phone buzzed in his pocket for the third time, the screen flashing with a missed call from the office. He didn't bother checking, focusing only on flipping through papers, searching for the file that held everything critical for today's hearing. The sound of a car engine rumbled. Clarence looked up, spotting a patrol car gliding slowly through the lot. The officer behind the wheel, Raymond Carver, glanced at him. Clarence quickly ducked down, trying not to draw attention. He had no time for trouble, but he felt Carver's gaze, sharp and probing. The patrol car stopped. A door opened, and the sound of leather shoes hitting the pavement echoed. "Hey!" a gruff voice called out. Clarence froze, fingers still gripping the edge of the seat. His heart sank. He took a deep breath, slowly stood upright, and turned to face the officer. Carver, a white man about 45, had a rigid face, eyes narrowed. His uniform was crisp, hand resting on his belt near his gun. "What do you think you're doing?" Carver asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Clarence wiped the sweat from his brow, keeping his tone steady. "I'm looking for a file," he said evenly. "I left it in this car." Carver's lip curled, a sneer forming. "A file? Got any ID?" His hand stayed on his belt, poised as if ready to act. Clarence felt his stomach tighten. "Like I said, I left the file," he explained, gesturing to the car seat. "I'm looking for it. This is my grandson's car." Carver squinted, eyeing Clarence up and down. "No ID, huh?" he cut in, not letting him finish. "Running late, aren't you?" "Step away from the car." Clarence pressed his lips together, suppressing his frustration. "I'm a state lawyer," he said, his voice firmer. "Clarence Thompson, this is my car. I just need to find the file, and I'll be on my way." Carver scoffed, shaking his head. "State lawyer? You expect me to believe that?" He stepped closer, his voice cold. "Step away from the car. Now." Clarence blinked, anger rising. "I'm telling the truth," he repeated, his voice patient. "This is my car. I'm looking for a file." Carver wasn't listening. "I said step away," he barked, his hand tightening. "You're acting real suspicious." Clarence knew arguing was pointless. Slowly he stepped back, raising his hand slightly to show compliance. The fountain pen brushed against his chest, urging him to hold on to his dignity. "This is my car," he said again, his voice steady. "You're making a mistake." Carver didn't respond. He moved forward, eyeing the SUV like he was searching for evidence. "Nice car like this, and you say it's yours." He gave a thin smile. "You look more like a thief to me." Clarence felt humiliation stir, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm Clarence Thompson," he said, "state lawyer. My file is in the car. If you check, you'll see." Carver shook his head, pulling out handcuffs. "Lawyer, huh? I haven't seen any proof, except you rummaging through someone else's car." He stepped forward, his voice cold. "Hands behind your back." Clarence opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. He knew that look, the prejudiced stare he'd seen his whole life. "You don't need to do this," he said, his voice low. "Just check the car." Carver cut him off. "I said hands." He grabbed Clarence's arm, spinning him around. The cuffs clicked, tightening around his wrists. Clarence winced, a sharp pain shooting through his aging joints. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice still controlled. "You're under arrest for suspected car theft," Carver said, his voice cold as stone. He pushed Clarence toward the patrol car, its back door already open. Clarence glanced back at the SUV, seeing the papers on the seat. The file was there, just steps away, but Carver didn't care to look. A quiet anger simmered in Clarence, like lava ready to erupt, but he held it back. Not now. He stepped into the patrol car, keeping his back straight, despite the cuffs making his shoulders ache. In his shirt pocket, the old fountain pen stayed still, the only thing reminding him who he was. Through the rearview mirror, he saw Officer Raymond Carver glance back, his eyes full of contempt. The engine roared steadily, pulling them away from the parking lot near the Hawthorne County Courthouse, toward the West Bridge Police Station. Carver broke the silence. "State lawyer, huh?" he smirked. "You'll have to come up with something better than that. That tired story won't save you." Clarence stared at Carver, his voice low and firm. "I'm not telling a story. I'm telling the truth. I'm Clarence Thompson, state lawyer. My car's parked right there. The file and papers are in the trunk. If you'd check instead of judging, you'd know." Carver didn't reply, but in the rearview mirror, his eyes flickered. Not enough to call it regret, but enough for Clarence to notice his words had hit somewhere. Carver smirked, shaking his head. "Files, papers," he mocked. "You think I'm stupid. I know your type. Rummaging through someone else's car, then making up excuses when you get caught." Clarence pressed his lips together, feeling the quiet anger burn. He'd heard these words his whole life, from the 1960s, when he was handcuffed for demanding equality, to the times he stood in court, defending the innocent. "Your type," he repeated, his voice low but sharp. "What's that mean, officer?" Carver glanced through the mirror, a faint smile. "It means you're making this harder than it needs to be. Don't play innocent. A car that nice isn't yours." Clarence felt the pain in his wrists flare, but he didn't let Carver see weakness. "It's my grandson's car, Malik Thompson," he said, his voice even. "I borrowed it for a meeting. Check the registration, and you'll know I'm not lying." Carver cut in, his voice cold. "Check what? You've got no papers. Acting suspicious. That's enough. Sit still. Don't test my patience." Clarence looked out the window, watching Westbridge's buildings pass by. He thought of Malik, worried his grandson would panic if he heard about this. He thought of the file in the car, years of work against injustice, now left behind because of one officer's bias. The fountain pen in his pocket reminded him of his father's words, "Don't let them take your dignity." He sat straighter, though the cuffs made his shoulders throb. Carver spoke again, his tone mocking. "State lawyer, huh? I bet you've got a long list of violations. Your type always does." Clarence turned to Carver, his gaze steady. "You're wrong," he said, his voice low. "I've spent my life defending justice." "What are you doing with your power?" Carver stiffened, his hands tightening on the wheel. "Don't lecture me," he snapped. "You want to make this a big deal? Go ahead, you'll regret it." Clarence didn't respond. He knew arguing with Carver now was futile. His lawyer's experience taught him calm was the only way through. He looked outside, seeing the Westbridge police station come into view, a gray building, fluorescent light spilling through the windows. The car stopped. Carver opened the back door, pulling Clarence out none too gently. "Let's go," he said, pushing him toward the entrance. Clarence walked slowly, his aging joints creaking faintly, but he kept his head high. The fountain pen in his pocket was an anchor, reminding him not to break. Inside the station, the smell of stale coffee and ringing phones filled the air. An administrative clerk, Sarah Newen, glanced at Clarence as he was led through. Her eyes flickered with surprise, as if she recognized him from somewhere, but she quickly looked down at her papers. Clarence said nothing, only noting her face. Carver shoved Clarence into a small holding room, a hard plastic chair in the middle of the floor. "Sit here," he ordered, uncuffing him. "Don't cause trouble, old man." Clarence looked at Carver. "You can stop this now," he said, his voice even. "Check the car. Check my identity. I'm Clarence Thompson, state lawyer." Carver gave a thin smile, standing at the door. "State lawyer, you look more like a crook to me. Stay put, and we'll see who you are." He slammed the door shut. Under the cold fluorescent light, Clarence Thompson sat quietly on the hard plastic chair in the holding room. His wrists still ached from the cuffs. His back twinged with every effort to sit straight, a habit from a lifetime of never bowing to prejudice. The gray, bare room, with only the distant sound of phones and officers' voices from the hall, underscored his isolation. In his suit jacket pocket, the old fountain pen brushed against his chest, a reminder of honor, of what no one could take from him. When the metal door clanked open, Raymond Carver stepped in, his eyes icy, his tone dripping with doubt. His mocking words were like a dull blade, not painful, just exhausting. Clarence didn't argue much. The truth was too clear, but to Carver, his skin was already a verdict, his words just noise. Carver paced in and out, repeatedly dismissing Clarence's identity, treating him like a con artist clinging to a fabricated story. Through every confrontation, Clarence sat still, his aged eyes unyielding. He'd met men like Carver before, young, arrogant, believing their authority let them err without question. Clarence didn't respond with anger, only with a silence as solid as stone, something time and bias couldn't wear down. Between the slamming doors, he thought of Malik, worried his grandson would panic if he found out. He thought of the files still in the car, proof of a career fighting injustice, now abandoned because of a one-sided glance. He thought of Eleanor, of the Hayes and Associates office, and the words he'd once spoken about justice, now ringing like a challenge to himself. Hours passed in tense quiet. An administrative clerk passed by, Sarah Newen. Her gaze lingered for a moment, hesitant. Clarence recognized her from a past trial, where he'd argued for the rights of the powerless. Her brief look, though fleeting, was like a crack of light through the cold wall, proof that someone still saw, someone remembered. And Clarence waited, not out of fear, but because he knew justice, though slow, needed someone patient to keep it alive. In his pocket, the old fountain pen stayed put, as if saying that what's right doesn't need to shout, only to endure. He rubbed his wrists, the ache still lingering. The fountain pen in his pocket seemed to whisper he wasn't alone. He'd been in rooms like this before, and he'd get through this one, but he knew the cost wouldn't be easy. Clarence took a deep breath, his gaze steady. Not done yet, he told himself, ready for what came next. Clarence Thompson sat in the holding room, his back against the hard plastic chair, wrists still sore from the handcuffs. The fluorescent light glared down, cold, but he kept his gaze firm, staring at the gray wall ahead. The fountain pen in his suit jacket pocket brushed lightly against his chest, like an anchor amid the helplessness he felt. The sound of ringing phones and officers' voices echoed from the hall, but no one came to the door. He knew he could only wait, though every passing minute deepened his worry for Malik and the file left in the car. Footsteps hurried down the hall, the iron door swung open, and a young officer stepped in, his voice curt. "You get one call," he said, pointing to the door. "Follow me." Clarence stood, each movement slow, his joints creaking faintly but clearly in the quiet space. He said nothing, silently following the officer through the hall to the intake area. Sarah Newen, still behind her desk of papers, glanced at him briefly before looking away, as if avoiding the injustice unfolding before her. In a side hallway, Clarence was led to a wall-mounted phone. The tangled cord mirrored his chaotic situation. He dialed a familiar number, hoping Eleanor Hayes was still at the office. Luckily, her voice answered after 2 rings, cool, sharp, and controlled. A few brief words were enough to convey the situation. He was arrested, wrongly accused, and needed her immediately. She didn't ask much, only promised to come right away, her voice colder by the end. Clarence returned to the cell, where the gray walls and cold metal chair no longer felt foreign. He sat, wrists still aching from the cuffs, but his resolve steadier. Urgent footsteps in the hall signaled something approaching. The door flew open, and Malik appeared, his face etched with anger and worry. Though he said nothing at first, his eyes told Clarence everything. His grandson knew. Malik rushed to confront the officer, while Clarence tried to keep things from spiraling. His grandson was furious at the injustice his grandfather faced, while the officer, Raymond Carver, stood firm in his shell of prejudice and belief he was right. Their words clashed like sharp blades, but Clarence stayed calm. He asked Malik to stop, to let him handle it. His composure wasn't weakness. It was forged through years as a lawyer, knowing truth needed evidence, not anger. When Eleanor arrived, the station's atmosphere shifted palpably. She swept in like a cold wind, carrying authority and resolve. Beside her was Chief Leonard Baxter, who quickly called for a meeting to clarify the situation. In a small meeting room, Clarence sat across from Carver, while Eleanor stood, her icy eyes scanning everyone. She didn't need to shout. Each word pinned the room, forcing Carver to face his rash actions. Clarence didn't say much. He recounted what happened, from the arrest to his futile attempts to explain. Carver insisted he followed protocol, citing no ID and suspicious behavior. But what Clarence saw wasn't stubbornness. It was the deep-seated bias, shaping how this officer viewed people. Baxter finally ordered an officer to verify. The SUV was still parked near the Hawthorne County Courthouse. 10 minutes later, the papers were brought back, confirming everything Clarence said. His name, title, the car's registration under Malik's name, all there from the start. The room grew heavy as the pieces fell into place. Carver, for the first time, lost his confident edge, but Clarence felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Tired of automatic suspicion, tired of being seen as an outsider just because he didn't fit their image of power and status. He didn't demand an apology. He demanded an investigation, not for himself, but for others who might have faced the same without a voice to defend them. As he left the station, his wrists still ached faintly from the cuffs, but his back was straighter than ever. Beside him, Eleanor walked decisively, while Malik followed, his eyes still burning. The fountain pen in Clarence's pocket brushed his chest with each step, reminding him that justice was never easy, but always worth fighting for. Clarence stood, relief mixing with hurt. He looked at Carver one last time, seeing him bow his head, hands clenched. He knew Carver wasn't sorry, but the truth was out. He left the meeting room, Eleanor at his side, her gaze resolute. The fountain pen in his pocket seemed to whisper. His dignity remained. In the hallway, Malik ran up, hugging him. "Grandpa, I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't expect this." Clarence patted Malik's shoulder, his voice low. "It's not your fault," he said, "but we have to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Eleanor nodded, her gaze sharp. "I'll file a public report," she said. "This doesn't end here." Clarence looked at his grandson and colleague, feeling a spark of hope amid the anger. He knew this wasn't over, but the truth had won a small battle. He took a deep breath, ready for what came next. Under the soft lights of the Hawthorne Center, Clarence Thompson stood tall before over 100 people, his silver hair gleaming like a symbol of experience and resilience. The small hall in the heart of Westbridge was packed, faces diverse from young adults to the elderly, from deep brown skin to pale white, all focused on him, carrying a mix of anticipation and outrage. The fountain pen in his suit jacket pocket brushed his chest, a small but steady anchor, reminding him of dignity and duty amid what he was about to share. The incident at the parking lot, where he was handcuffed just for standing by his grandson's SUV, had spread through the community like a smoldering fire. News of the injustice didn't just spark anger, it awakened a deep desire for change. Clarence took a long breath, his voice low but resonant, filling the hall. He didn't start with his own pain, though the memory of the officer's contemptuous stare still cut deep. Instead he spoke of others, those doubted, stopped, treated as strangers just for their skin or appearance. Malik Thompson, his grandson, stood in the front row, hands clenched, eyes blazing with a mix of pride and unquelled anger. Beside Malik was Eleanor Hayes, his sharp-witted colleague, her pen moving swiftly over her notebook, capturing every detail for the public report she'd vowed to bring to light. As he stressed the need for change, a middle-aged man raised his hand, his voice trembling as he recounted being stopped by police just for walking in a wealthy neighborhood, questioned as if he didn't belong. A young woman stood abruptly, tears glistening on her cheeks as she shared about her son, a 16-year-old boy arrested without cause, while waiting for a bus, left with a fear that kept him from going out alone. Clarence listened, his eyes calm but unflinching, as if each story was a brick building his resolve. He emphasized that suspending one officer, though a start, wasn't enough to heal the wounds the community had endured too long. The system's way of seeing and acting needed to change, not just promises, but concrete, lasting action. He mentioned the confrontation at the Westbridge police station, where he'd urged Chief Leonard Baxter to review not just individual conduct, but the police force's culture, where bias could seep into every decision. At that moment, the hall's doors swung open, sharp footsteps ringing on the wooden floor. Leonard Baxter, in a crisp uniform, stepped in, his face tense under the crowd's scrutinizing gazes. A few murmurs of discontent rose, mixed with soft protests. Baxter walked to the stage, standing beside Clarence, his demeanor serious but not evasive. He admitted the department's error in Clarence's case, pledging immediate training programs to identify and eliminate racial bias. More, he proposed a civilian oversight board, with Clarence's involvement, so the community's voice could directly shape department decisions. Baxter's words were clear, but the crowd remained wary, their eyes fixed on him, searching for sincerity. Malik stood from the front row, his gaze sharp as a blade. When he looked at Baxter, he didn't need to say much. His presence, with its quiet fury, was enough to remind everyone why they were here. Clarence glanced at his grandson, his eyes softening for a moment, before turning to Baxter. He agreed to join the board, but his voice was firm, stressing he didn't want empty promises. He needed results, real changes, in how police interacted with the community, how they were trained, how they were held accountable. The crowd erupted in applause, support swelling like a wave. Clara Dunham, who'd witnessed Clarence's arrest at the parking lot, stood, her hands trembling but her voice strong. She confessed her regret for staying silent in that moment, and vowed to speak out for justice from now on. Her words swept through the hall like a breeze, sparking nods of empathy and determined looks. Eleanor, seizing the moment, stood to confirm she'd sent a detailed petition to the city council. She promised to closely monitor the department's every move, ensuring this incident wouldn't be buried in hollow apologies. A young reporter, David Lynn, raised his hand from the back, pen poised. He asked what message Clarence wanted to send to the broader public. Clarence looked at him, his eyes calm, but burning with unshakable faith. He said this fight wasn't just for him, but for the forgotten, those without a chance to speak, and for the generation like Malik, so they could live in a fairer world. Malik stepped onto the stage, standing by him, his stance resolute like a declaration that Clarence's fire would carry on, never fading. Applause thundered, shaking the hall, as if everyone was pledging to a shared goal. Baxter, still there, repeated his promise that the oversight board would start work the next week. But Clarence's eyes didn't leave him, as if etching that every word would be measured by action. He knew Baxter might be sincere, but he also knew real change demanded time, pressure, and relentless persistence. Under the fading afternoon light, as the community meeting ended, the crowd lingered in the hall. No one rushed to leave. They gathered around Clarence, one by one, shaking his hand, sharing stories held deep. Time stopped without cause. Suspicious glares, accusations without proof. Clarence listened, his gaze steady, but not hiding his empathy. Each tale added weight to his shoulders, heavy but never bending him. In his suit jacket pocket, the old fountain pen brushed his chest, as if saying he didn't walk alone. As he left the hall, streetlights cast shadows on his weathered face. David Lynn, the young local reporter, still scribbled notes, ready to turn this story into a wave across Westbridge. Clarence paused on the steps, feeling the air, chaotic but hopeful. Back at the office the next afternoon, sunset streamed through the large window, bathing the room in calm orange. Clarence sat at his desk, gently turning the old fountain pen, his father's keepsake, a symbol of a lifetime's unending fight. The file from Malik's SUV lay neatly before him, no longer evidence of a misunderstanding, but a reminder of the value of self-respect. of dignity affronted just for a prejudiced glance. Malik stepped in, saying little, only quietly placing a new fountain pen on the desk. Its metal gleamed softly in the twilight. Clarence looked at his grandson, seeing maturity in his eyes and a promise needing no words. The wave had begun, and the next generation was ready to step up. Eleanor Hayes appeared at the door, briefly reporting that David Lynn's article had spread, the city council had spoken, and a meeting awaited them. Clarence stood, nodding, not as one bracing for battle, but as a guide. This fight was no longer his alone. It was a collective duty, a journey for many generations. On the way to the Hawthorne Center, they passed young people talking under streetlights. Clarence slowed, watching them with a pensive gaze. In their eyes were old memories, the fire he'd carried in youth, now passed on. He handed the new fountain pen to Malik, not with words, but with trust. The incident with Officer Raymond Carver had closed in name, but its echoes didn't leave him. The marks on his wrists, the contemptuous stare of a man claiming the law, and the cold silence of the holding room remained, like a smoldering scar in memory. Malik stepped in, bringing a youthful energy, and a gaze no longer naive. In his hand was a new fountain pen, gleaming, quietly placed on the desk before him. Without many words, Clarence understood it was a vow, a next generation ready to rise. He sat across from him, his gaze steady, as if saying the road ahead, though tough, wouldn't be walked alone. Clarence took the pen, feeling its cool, smooth metal, and saw not just a gift, but a banner passed on. The ideals that carried him through decades were now handed down. Eleanor Hayes appeared at the door, her sharp gaze carrying fresh news. David Lynn's article was out. The city was buzzing. The city council wanted to meet them. Without much said, Clarence stood. He knew this battle was far from over, and they people like him. Malik, Eleanor couldn't stop. Leaving the office, Clarence, Malik and Eleanor passed the Hawthorne Center, where applause, promises and tears had rung out. Now, under streetlights, young people gathered, their eyes sparkling with hope. Clarence paused, watching them, seeing himself in youth, full of ambition and faith. He drew the new fountain pen and handed it to Malik, needing no words. A silent transfer, not just an heirloom, but duty and trust in the next generation. Malik gripped the pen tightly, as if holding a legacy to be written on. They walked on. In his pocket, Clarence kept his father's old pen, knowing the struggle wasn't done. But he wasn't alone anymore. He saw youth, companionship and hope growing, not a distant dream, but a reality, step by step, and he was ready for the journey ahead. The story, racist cop arrests, black old man, turns out he's state lawyer, that I've rewritten, reflects a painful reality in today's American society, racism and abuse of power in law enforcement. Set in Westbridge, Ohio, the story portrays Clarence Thompson, a 70-year-old black state lawyer, arrested by Officer Raymond Carver, just for rummaging through his grandson Malik's car, an act suspected not based on evidence, but on bias about race and age. This event recalls real cases like George Floyd or Eric Garner, where black people faced injustice from police, sparking the Black Lives Matter movement. The fountain pen, Clarence's heirloom from his father, symbolizes the dignity he holds firm, much like how many Americans today draw strength from the civil rights struggle to face current injustices. Eleanor Hayes and Malik's intervention, along with the community meeting at the Hawthorne Center, reflect the spirit of unity and collective voice, evident in U.S. protests demanding police reform. The lesson from the story isn't just to fight racism, but to take concrete steps to change the system. Clarence didn't just demand Carver's suspension, but urged Chief Baxter for department-wide reform, like training and oversight boards. A practical suggestion for Americans today: don't just be angry, engage in local government, vote for reform, and hold public institutions accountable. Malik receiving the new fountain pen from Clarence symbolizes the younger generation taking up the responsibility, reminding us that justice is a long journey needing persistence and unity. Learn from Clarence, hold your dignity, speak the truth, and turn personal injustice into a drive for collective change. Subscribe to the channel to follow us in pursuing justice like Clarence Thompson's story, and thank you for joining The Truth today. See you in the next video, where we continue exploring stories that change communities.